The fastest way to lose faith in love is to watch someone promise forever, while secretly planning a future without you. 6 years. That was how long I loved Daniel. 6 years of birthdays, road trips, late-night phone calls, and plans carefully built around a future we both claimed to want. If someone had asked me 3 months earlier where my life was headed, I would have answered without hesitation. Marriage. A small house somewhere outside the city. A golden retriever. 2 kids. Maybe 3 if Daniel got his way. I believed every word of that future because I believed him. Looking back now, that might have been my biggest mistake. The night everything fell apart started like every romantic movie I had ever loved. Soft music played through hidden speakers at a downtown restaurant overlooking the river. Candlelight flickered against crystal glasses. The city skyline glowed beyond the windows. I spent almost an hour deciding what to wear because deep down, I thought this was the night. The night he would finally propose. I still remember checking my reflection before leaving my apartment. My hands trembled with excitement. My heart felt impossibly light. I was 28 years old, and convinced the best chapter of my life was about to begin. Daniel arrived 15 minutes late. At the time, I ignored the warning sign. People are remarkably talented at excusing the behavior of those they love. He seemed distracted throughout dinner. His phone lit up repeatedly beside his plate. Every few minutes his attention drifted elsewhere. I asked if something was wrong. He smiled and said work was stressful. I believed him. Again. After dessert, he excused himself and stepped outside to take a call. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, I decided to go find him. The restaurant's private event hallway was mostly empty. Soft jazz echoed from distant speakers. As I rounded the corner, I heard Daniel's voice. He was laughing. Not the polite laugh he used with coworkers. Not the careful laugh he used around family. A genuine laugh. The kind I had not heard in months. I stopped walking. Something felt wrong. Then I heard a woman's voice answer him. My stomach tightened. Immediately. Every instinct I possessed told me to leave. Instead, I stayed. Once everything is finalized, Daniel said, we can stop hiding. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Silence followed. Then the woman laughed softly. What about Olivia? My name. Hearing it felt like stepping onto thin ice and hearing the first crack. Daniel sighed. She still thinks we are getting married. For a moment, I genuinely stopped breathing. Not metaphorically. Literally. My lungs forgot how to work. The hallway blurred around me. I remember gripping the wall just to stay standing. The woman sounded surprised. You have not told her yet? Soon. Soon. 6 years together. Reduced to a single careless word. I do not remember leaving. I do not remember getting home. I only remember sitting on my apartment floor sometime after midnight staring at the engagement photo board I had secretly started months earlier. Tears never came. Shock arrived first. The kind that leaves everything numb. Morning sunlight eventually filled the room. My phone buzzed beside me. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I did not answer. Then another call came. Then another. Finally, a new notification appeared. Not from Daniel. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I opened the message. The sender identified themselves as a representative of the Hayes family. The message was brief, professional, unexpected. They requested a private meeting regarding a proposal that could change my future. At that moment, I had no idea who Nathaniel Hayes was. I only knew that my old life had ended less than 12 hours earlier. And somehow, another one was already knocking at the door. The message sat on my screen for nearly an hour before I answered it. Under normal circumstances, I would have deleted it immediately. Wealthy families did not contact women like me. Billionaire CEOs did not send mysterious invitations. Nothing about the situation made sense. Then again, neither had the previous 12 hours. My life had already shattered. Curiosity felt less dangerous than heartbreak. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon at Hayes Holdings headquarters. I almost turned around. 3 separate times on the way there. The building itself looked more like a luxury hotel than a corporate office. Glass walls reflected the city skyline. Black cars lined the entrance. Employees moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to operating at the highest level. Meanwhile, I stood outside clutching my purse like it contained emotional support equipment. The receptionist greeted me by name before I even introduced myself. That should have been my first warning. Someone was expecting me. Very much expecting me. 10 minutes later, I stepped into a private conference room on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked half the city. A polished walnut table stretched across the room. Everything smelled expensive. Then the door opened. And for the first time, I met Nathaniel Hayes. 40 years old. Tall. Impeccably dressed. Calm in a way that made everyone else seem rushed. He entered without an entourage, without fanfare, without trying to impress anyone. Somehow that made him more intimidating. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. Gray eyes. Controlled expression. The kind of face that revealed absolutely nothing. He sat across from me. Miss Bennett. His voice was deep and steady. Thank you for coming. I nodded carefully. I almost did not. To my surprise, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. That would have been understandable. Silence followed. Nathaniel studied a file in front of him before closing it completely. Then his attention returned to me. Fully. Undivided. It felt strangely intense. I prefer direct conversations, he said. So I will not waste your time. Something about the statement made my pulse quicken. All right. He folded his hands together. I would like to discuss a marriage arrangement. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. The words were so unexpected that my brain rejected them entirely. Marriage arrangement. Not business partnership. Not consulting opportunity. Marriage. I stared at him. He remained perfectly calm. You are serious? Yes. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because reality had apparently stopped following rules. You do not even know me. Actually, I know quite a bit about you. That answer somehow made everything stranger. My expression must have revealed exactly what I was thinking, because Nathaniel continued immediately. Nothing inappropriate. Public information. Educational records. Professional background. Family history. That explanation did not improve the situation. For the first time, an actual smile appeared. Brief. Controlled. Gone almost instantly. Yet it transformed his entire face. Then the serious expression returned. This proposal benefits both of us. I leaned back. How? Nathaniel looked toward the skyline beyond the windows. Because I require a wife. The sentence sounded absurdly practical. And I require stability. His gaze met mine again. You recently lost something important. The observation hit closer than I wanted. How do you know that? He paused. People notice more than they admit. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city stretched below us. Cars moved through the streets like distant streams of light. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. Why me? Nathaniel became unusually quiet. Not uncomfortable. Careful. As though selecting the answer mattered. Then he said something I would spend months trying to understand. Because I believe you are exactly who I have been looking for. And somehow, that impossible conversation only became more complicated from there. I should have walked away. Any reasonable person would have. A billionaire CEO proposing a marriage arrangement to a woman he barely knew sounded less like reality, and more like the plot of an unbelievable novel. Yet somehow, 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Nathaniel Hayes again. This time, neither of us was pretending the conversation was normal. Rain tapped softly against the windows of his office. The city below looked gray and distant beneath the storm clouds. Nathaniel remained exactly as composed as before. If he felt nervous about asking someone to marry him, he hid it remarkably well. You are still here, he observed. I folded my arms. I am trying to figure out whether this is the worst idea I have ever heard. To my surprise, he nodded. A reasonable concern. The answer almost made me smile. Almost. Over the next hour, Nathaniel explained everything with the precision of a man presenting a business strategy. There would be no pressure. No expectations beyond mutual respect. Complete financial independence for both parties. Separate professional lives. Absolute privacy. The more he spoke, the stranger the situation became. Because beneath the unusual proposal, I found something unexpected. Honesty. Nathaniel never tried to sell me a fantasy. He never promised love. Never promised happiness. He only promised stability. After everything Daniel had taken from me, stability suddenly sounded far more valuable than romance. 3 weeks later, we were married. Even now, saying those words feels unreal. The ceremony itself was small, quiet, private. No extravagant media coverage. No dramatic spectacle. Just a handful of witnesses and 2 people making promises neither fully understood yet. I remember standing beside Nathaniel beneath soft afternoon light streaming through the chapel windows. He looked calm as always. Immaculate suit. Controlled expression. Steady voice. Meanwhile, my emotions resembled a tornado trapped inside formal clothing. Yet every time uncertainty threatened to overwhelm me, I found myself glancing at him. Somehow his calm became an anchor. After the ceremony ended, reporters waited outside the property gates. Nathaniel's security team handled everything smoothly. Within minutes, we were inside a black sedan heading toward what was now technically our home. The silence inside the vehicle stretched for several miles. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "If you are uncomfortable with anything, tell me." I looked over. "Anything. Anything." His answer arrived without hesitation. "This arrangement only works if you feel safe." Safe. Such a simple word. Yet hearing it made something tighten unexpectedly inside my chest. Because after the previous few weeks, safety felt like a luxury. The Hayes estate appeared at the end of a winding private road surrounded by enormous oak trees. The property was breathtaking. Elegant without being excessive. Beautiful without trying too hard. Yet, the moment we stepped inside, I noticed something else. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Lonely silence. The kind that settles into a place after years of being occupied by only one person. Nathaniel gave me a brief tour. Library. Kitchen. Living areas. Guest wing. Garden paths. Everything was immaculate. Everything felt untouched. Finally, he stopped outside a large bedroom overlooking the rear gardens. "This is yours." I blinked. "Mine?" "Yes." "And yours?" He gestured toward the opposite side of the hallway. "Across from yours." I stared at him. "Separate rooms?" Nathaniel looked genuinely confused. "Would you prefer otherwise?" Suddenly, I understood something important. Nathaniel Hayes had prepared for every possible concern, except the possibility that I might expect anything romantic. The realization was oddly comforting. That night, after unpacking a few belongings, I stood alone beside the bedroom window watching rain fall across the dark gardens. Everything about my life had changed. My last name. My address. My future. Yet the strangest part was not marrying a billionaire CEO. It was realizing that behind all his wealth and control, Nathaniel Hayes seemed just as alone as I was. The first month of marriage felt less like a marriage and more like 2 strangers carefully learning the boundaries of a shared life. Nathaniel left for work before sunrise most mornings. I usually found a handwritten note beside the coffee machine informing me that breakfast was ready in the kitchen if I wanted it. The notes were brief, polite, almost formal. Yet somehow they became the first thing I looked for every day. One Monday morning, the note simply read, "Good luck with your presentation today." I stared at it longer than necessary. I had mentioned that presentation exactly once during dinner 3 nights earlier. Nathaniel had been reading financial reports at the time. I assumed he was not listening. Apparently, I was wrong. That realization became a pattern. Little things started appearing everywhere. My favorite herbal tea was always stocked in the pantry before it ran out. A replacement charger appeared in my home office the day after mine stopped working. The reading lamp I casually mentioned liking during a shopping trip somehow arrived at the estate before I did. None of the gestures were extravagant. That was what made them impossible to ignore. Nathaniel never overwhelmed me with luxury. Instead, he paid attention. One rainy afternoon, I returned from a design meeting downtown. As I entered the estate, I found fresh flowers arranged on the dining room table. White lilies. My favorite. I stopped walking. The housekeeper smiled from across the room. Mr. Hayes selected them personally. My stomach performed a strange and highly unhelpful movement. Did he say why? She looked surprised. Because you like them. The answer followed me all evening. Later that night, Nathaniel arrived home later than usual. He looked tired. Not physically exhausted. Mentally tired. The kind of fatigue that settles behind someone's eyes after carrying responsibility for too long. We shared dinner in comfortable silence until I finally asked the question. Why lilies? His fork paused briefly. You mentioned them once. 3 weeks ago. Yes. I blinked. Nathaniel returned to his meal as though memorizing random details about people was completely normal behavior. Maybe it was for him. The more time I spent around him, the more I realized how carefully he observed the world. Nothing escaped his attention. Several days later, another surprise arrived. My old apartment lease was scheduled to expire at the end of the month. I planned to handle everything myself. Before I could even begin the process, a neatly organized folder appeared on my desk. Inside were moving documents, storage arrangements, and property transfer paperwork. Every detail had already been coordinated. At first, irritation flared. Then I noticed a note attached to the folder. If you prefer a different arrangement, tell me and we will change it. Nothing has been finalized. Nathaniel. I laughed despite myself. Somehow he had anticipated my frustration before it happened. More importantly, he had left me a choice. That evening, I found him reading in the library. Soft lamplight illuminated the room. Rain tapped gently against the windows. You know, I said, entering the room, most people would consider this level of organization slightly alarming. Nathaniel looked up from his book. Only slightly? The deadpan delivery caught me completely off guard. I laughed. For the first time since moving into the estate, he smiled fully. Not controlled. Not restrained. Real. The sight lasted only a few seconds. Yet somehow it changed the entire room. And as I stood there watching him, a quiet realization settled into my heart. The most surprising thing about Nathaniel Hayes was not his wealth. It was how much effort he invested into making sure I never felt alone. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely announces itself. One day you are surviving. Then suddenly, without realizing when it happened, you are living again. 3 months after my wedding, I noticed I no longer thought about Daniel every morning. The realization came while I was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Birds moved across the gardens outside. The world felt peaceful. Ordinary. For a moment, I simply stood there staring at the coffee mug in my hands. The pain that had once consumed every waking thought was gone. Not buried. Gone. And somehow, the person responsible for that miracle was a man who never once tried to replace my past. Nathaniel simply gave me space to build a future. By then, I had also learned something important about my husband. Beneath his calm exterior lived a memory that bordered on impossible. He remembered everything. Not just important dates. Everything. One evening during dinner, I casually mentioned a small bakery from my childhood hometown. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds before moving on. 2 weeks later, I returned home from work to find a familiar white box sitting on the kitchen counter. My heart nearly stopped. The bakery's logo stared back at me. I opened the box and immediately recognized the cinnamon pastries my grandmother used to buy every Saturday morning. Nathaniel looked up from his laptop. The owner ships nationwide. I stared at him. I mentioned this place once. Twice. He corrected me without looking away from the screen. The first time was during breakfast in February. My mouth actually fell open. Nathaniel finally glanced up. A hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. What? That is terrifying. To my surprise, he laughed. The sound was rare enough that I almost forgot my original complaint. Moments like that became increasingly common. One afternoon, I discovered that he had quietly rearranged his entire travel schedule after overhearing me mention a charity gala. I was nervous about attending alone. He never announced the change. Never asked for recognition. He simply appeared beside me that evening wearing a black tuxedo and acting as though he had always intended to be there. Another time, I developed a mild cold after spending several days visiting construction sites for a design project. The next morning, every item commonly recommended for recovery had somehow appeared in the kitchen. Teh, honey, soup, medicine, fresh fruit. Nathaniel never mentioned any of it. Yet somehow the supplies appeared exactly when needed. The most dangerous part was not the gifts. It was the attention. Because attention creates attachment. And attachment creates feelings people are not prepared to handle. One rainy evening, I found myself working late in the library. Nathaniel sat across from me reviewing documents. The room glowed with soft lamplight. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Neither of us spoke for nearly an hour. The silence felt comfortable. Familiar. Safe. Finally, I looked up from my laptop. Nathaniel was already looking at me. Not accidentally. Not briefly. Looking. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he spoke quietly. You changed your perfume. The observation caught me completely off guard. What? His expression remained calm. 3 days ago. My pulse immediately accelerated. You noticed? Nathaniel seemed confused by the question. Of course. Then he returned to his paperwork as though noticing a tiny detail like that was perfectly normal. Set frozen. Because suddenly dozens of memories rearranged themselves inside my head. The flowers. The tea. The pastries. The travel schedules. The details. The constant attention. Nathaniel Hayes noticed everything about me. Absolutely. Everything. And as rain continued falling outside the estate windows, I began wondering whether the cold, distant CEO I married had stopped seeing our marriage as an arrangement a long time ago. The realization followed me everywhere. Through breakfast conversations. Through work meetings. Through quiet evenings at the estate. Once I noticed how carefully Nathaniel paid attention to me. I could not stop noticing it. Every glance seemed to last a little longer. Every thoughtful gesture carried new meaning. The problem was that I had no idea what to do with that information. Because somewhere between shared dinners and rainy evenings in the library, my feelings had started changing too. 3 months earlier, Nathaniel Hayes had been a stranger. Now he was the first person I wanted to tell when something good happened. The first person I looked for when I entered a room. The first person whose opinion genuinely mattered. That realization should have terrified me. Instead, it felt strangely natural. Then everything changed because of a folder. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Nathaniel was in Chicago for meetings. I was working from the estate library when I received an urgent call from one of my clients. The project files I needed were stored on Nathaniel's private office computer. He had given me permission to access anything necessary while he was away. Simple enough. At least it should have been. 20 minutes later, I found myself searching through several digital folders looking for the correct documents. Most contained business reports, contracts, and financial information. Then one folder caught my attention. The name was simply OB. My initials. Instantly, my pulse accelerated. Curiosity won. It usually does. I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of documents. For a moment, I could not understand what I was seeing. Then reality slowly settled into place. School achievements. Professional accomplishments. Charity work. Design awards. Volunteer activities. Newspaper mentions. Even old interviews connected to projects I had completed years earlier. Set frozen. The files stretched back far beyond our marriage. Far beyond my breakup. Far beyond our first meeting. My hands actually trembled as I opened another document. Then another. Then another. The dates became impossible to ignore. Nathaniel had been following my career for years. Not obsessively. Not intrusively. But consistently. Carefully. Intentionally. I leaned back in the chair, stunned. Nothing made sense anymore. Why would a billionaire CEO know so much about a woman he had supposedly chosen only months ago? The answer arrived from an unexpected source later that evening. Nathaniel returned home shortly before sunset. I found him in the garden reviewing messages on his phone. The The moment he saw my expression, he knew something had happened. Olivia. I held up a printed document from the folder. You want to explain this? For the first time since I met him, genuine surprise crossed his face. Not controlled. Not hidden. Real surprise. Silence followed. Then he slowly lowered the phone. You found the files. It was not a question. Years, Nathaniel. My voice softened despite myself. These go back years. He looked away briefly toward the gardens. The setting sun painted gold across the trees. For several long seconds he said nothing. Then he finally spoke. 7 years. My heart stopped. What? His gaze returned to mine. Calm. Honest. Vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. I first heard you speak at a design conference 7 years ago. The world seemed to tilt. Nathaniel continued quietly. You talked about creating spaces that felt like home for people who had never truly had one. His expression softened. I never forgot it. I could barely breathe. You have known about me for 7 years? Known of you, he corrected gently. Not known you. The distinction somehow made everything worse. And better. At the same time. Then Nathaniel said the one thing I never expected to hear. Olivia, the truth is that choosing you was never difficult. His voice lowered. The difficult part was convincing myself that someone like you would ever choose me back. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The evening air felt unusually still. Somewhere beyond the gardens, a fountain murmured softly beneath the fading sunlight. Yet all I could hear was the echo of Nathaniel's confession. 7 years. While I had been building a life, making mistakes, falling in love with the wrong person, and trying to find my place in the world, Nathaniel Hayes had quietly existed somewhere in the background. Not interfering. Not manipulating. Simply watching from a distance and remembering. The realization should have frightened me. Instead, it left me strangely emotional. Why did you never tell me? I asked softly. Nathaniel released a slow breath. Because it sounded unbelievable. A faint smile touched his face. And because I never expected our paths to cross. I looked down at the documents in my hands. Every achievement. Every project. Every small victory. I barely remembered myself. Somehow he remembered them all. You kept track of everything. His expression became thoughtful. Not everything. My eyes lifted toward him. Only the things that mattered. My heart betrayed me again. It had been doing that a lot lately. Before I could respond, Nathaniel's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The warmth disappeared from his expression almost instantly. Not anger. Concern. What is it? I asked. He hesitated. Nothing important. Which was exactly how I knew it was important. The following morning, I learned the truth. Daniel was back. Not physically at first. Digitally. Through messages. Emails. Missed calls. Social media requests. After nearly a year of silence, he had suddenly rediscovered my existence. The first message arrived before breakfast. Olivia, can we talk? The second arrived 20 minutes later. I made a mistake. The third came shortly after lunch. Please give me 5 minutes. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Once upon a time, those words would have shattered me. Now they felt strangely distant. Like reading a letter addressed to someone I used to be. That evening, I was reviewing design proposals in my office when the estate's front gate security team called. A visitor had arrived unexpectedly. My stomach sank immediately. Somehow I already knew. 5 minutes later, I stood near the entrance hall watching Daniel through the glass doors. He looked almost exactly the same. Same smile. Same confident posture. Same face I once imagined growing old beside. Yet something fundamental had changed. Not him. Me. When I stepped outside, his expression immediately brightened. Olivia. The familiarity felt strange now. Like hearing an old song that no longer meant anything. What are you doing here? I asked. Daniel looked genuinely emotional. Trying to fix the biggest mistake of my life. Months ago, those words would have destroyed every defense I possessed. Instead, I found myself studying him calmly. Almost objectively. He talked for several minutes. Regret. Apologies. explanations, promises. The speech seemed carefully prepared. When he finally stopped, silence settled between us. Are you finished? I asked quietly. Confusion crossed his face. What? Your speech? Daniel blinked. Olivia, I came because I still love you. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Because he still believed he was speaking to the woman whose world ended in that restaurant hallway. That woman no longer existed. I smiled politely. No, Daniel. His expression froze. You came because you finally realized what you lost. The truth landed between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. And for the first time since everything began, I felt completely free. Because while Daniel was standing in front of me trying to reclaim the past, my heart was already somewhere else entirely. After Daniel left, I stood alone beneath the estate's entrance lights for several minutes. The night air felt cool against my skin. Somewhere in the distance, wind moved softly through the trees. For the first time, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. Closure does not come from hearing an apology. It comes from realizing you no longer need one. When I finally walked back inside, the house felt unusually quiet. Nathaniel was in his study. A thin line of light spilled beneath the door. I hesitated before knocking. Come in, his voice called immediately. Somehow he always knew when it was me. I entered slowly. Nathaniel sat behind his desk reviewing documents, but the moment he saw my face, his attention shifted completely. How did it go? He asked. The question was simple. The concern behind it was not. I crossed the room and settled into the chair opposite him. It ended. Nathaniel nodded once. He did not ask for details. He did not demand explanations. He simply waited. The silence felt safe. I thought seeing him again would hurt, I admitted. But it did not. Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. Good. Another quiet moment passed between us. Then I smiled faintly. You knew he was coming, did not you? Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. The security team informed me. And you still let me handle it myself. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. You did not need me to fight your battles, Olivia. My heart tightened unexpectedly. Because that was the difference. Daniel always wanted to rescue the version of me he imagined. Nathaniel respected the woman I actually was. Days passed. Then weeks. Life settled into a rhythm again. Yet something fundamental had changed between us. The invisible distance that once existed inside our marriage was disappearing. We spent more evenings together. More breakfasts. More conversations that stretched long past midnight. One Saturday afternoon, rain covered the estate grounds in a silver curtain. Nathaniel and I sat in the library reading. Neither of us had spoken for nearly an hour. Yet the silence felt full rather than empty, comfortable rather than awkward, home rather than temporary. I looked up from my book and found him watching me again. That familiar look. Quiet. Focused. Unguarded. This time I did not look away. Neither did he. Nathaniel. I asked softly. Yes. My pulse quickened. Why did you really keep your distance after we got married? For several seconds, he said nothing. The rain continued tapping gently against the windows. Finally, he closed his book. Because I was afraid. The answer stunned me. Of all the things I expected to hear, fear was not one of them. Nathaniel lowered his gaze briefly before meeting mine again. I built my entire life around control. Business. Decisions. Outcomes. His voice remained calm, but something deeper existed beneath the surface. Then you arrived. My heart began beating harder. And suddenly none of those things mattered anymore. The room seemed smaller somehow. More intimate. More honest. Nathaniel released a quiet breath. You made this house feel alive. His eyes never left mine. You made me look forward to coming home. Emotion tightened my throat. He smiled faintly. Not the polished smile the world saw. The real one. And that terrified me. The confession settled between us like falling rain. Because in that moment I finally understood. Nathaniel Hayes had never been protecting himself from rejection. He had been protecting himself from losing the one person who transformed a mansion into a home. 1 year later, I found myself standing in the exact same garden where Nathaniel had confessed the truth about his fears. Spring sunlight filtered through the trees. Fresh flowers lined the stone pathways. The fountain still murmured softly in the distance. Yet everything felt different now. Not because the estate had changed. Because we had. Sometimes people imagine life-changing moments as dramatic events. Grand declarations. Perfect timing. Fireworks. The truth is usually quieter. Real love grows through ordinary mornings. Shared routines. Consistent choices. Looking back, that was exactly what happened to us. The woman who arrived at Hayes Estate carrying a broken heart no longer existed. Somewhere along the way, she had become someone stronger. Someone happier. Someone capable of trusting again. My phone vibrated in my hand. A message from Nathaniel appeared on the screen. Running 10 minutes late. Do not start without me. I smiled immediately. A year later, that still happened. The smallest messages from him somehow made my day better. I walked toward the terrace overlooking the gardens. Several guests had already arrived for the Charity Foundation celebration we organized together. Designers. Community leaders. Families helped by our housing initiatives. People laughing beneath strings of soft lights. Years earlier, I had spoken at a conference about creating spaces that felt like home. Now those ideas had become reality on a scale I never imagined possible. And Nathaniel had supported every step. Not because he wanted recognition. Because he believed in me. The thought still amazed me. A familiar voice interrupted my reflection. You are smiling. I turned immediately. Nathaniel stood several feet away. Dark suit. Calm expression. Gray eyes focused entirely on me. Some things never changed. Fortunately, they were the things that mattered. You are late, I informed him. 9 minutes. He checked his watch. Technically accurate. I laughed. Nathaniel crossed the distance between us. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Simply natural. Like every path eventually led us back to each other. We stood beside the terrace railing overlooking the gardens below. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. Home. Finally, Nathaniel glanced toward the celebration. They seem happy. They are. I smiled. You helped make that happen. He shook his head immediately. We did. Such a simple correction. Yet somehow it meant everything. Because that had become the foundation of our marriage. Not you. Not me. Us. Shared victories. Shared responsibilities. Shared dreams. The evening continued around us. Music drifted through the warm spring air. Guests moved between conversations. Laughter echoed across the estate grounds. Yet my attention remained fixed on the man beside me. The same man who once believed he was too difficult to love. The same man who spent years admiring someone from afar without expecting anything in return. The same man who transformed every ordinary day into something meaningful, through thousands of small acts of care. Nathaniel looked at me suddenly. What? I asked. A faint smile appeared. Nothing. I narrowed my eyes. Nathaniel. His smile widened slightly. I was just thinking that inviting you to that first meeting was the best decision I ever made. Emotion caught me completely off guard. A year ago, hearing those words would have felt impossible. Now they felt true. Entirely true. I reached for his hand. He immediately intertwined his fingers with mine. Effortlessly. Naturally. Like he always had. Together we watched the sunset paint gold across the gardens. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood something the painful version of me could never have imagined. The right person does not erase your past. They build a future so full of meaning that the past no longer controls the story. And standing beside Nathaniel Hayes, surrounded by the life we chose together, I knew I was exactly where I belonged.